Hilchos Korban Pesach, Perek Revi, the laws of the Passover sacrifice, chapter 4. This class is being pre-recorded before Yom Kippur, but it's the Rambam for Yom Kippur of this year. On Yom Kippur, learning about the Passover sacrifice, there's got to be a connection. And while it's not clear in the halachas that we're going to learn today, any connection between Pesach and Yom Kippur, maybe thematically we could suggest that the idea of the Passover sacrifice and the idea of Yom Kippur share a theme. The idea of the Passover sacrifice, the words in the Torah used are upasach Hashem. When Hashem sees that the Jewish people are devoted to His will, He passes over their homes, literally, but figuratively it means Hashem transcends all the limitations of all the other typical ways of looking at the Jewish people and looks at them with compassion and with mercy. And the same thing on Yom Kippur, each of us is asking Hashem to transcend the way He would regularly look at us. Don't look at the way we acted in the past year necessarily. Forgiveness comes from a place that's higher than our actions. It's because of the connection essence to essence, our essence to Hashem's essence. That's what allows for the forgiveness to take place and for real tshuva to take place. So perhaps that's the message of learning about Pesach and Yom Kippur, that these two themes are the same. At any rate, we're going to be learning today about different cases where the Passover sacrifice becomes disqualified for different reasons. Either it was slaughtered in the wrong way, or it got lost and there was a replacement found. What to do with that, as we're going to see throughout the chapter. It says that Rambam halacha aleph kvar nisbar b'hilchos psulei hamukdashin. It's already been explained in the laws of disqualified sacrifices in the last book. Sheha pesach einei nishchat ela l'shem pesach u'l'shem ba'alav. The Passover sacrifice may not be slaughtered with any other intention other than the fact that it's for a Passover sacrifice, and you also have to have in mind the owner, who it's for. And if you slaughtered it with an improper name thought, in other words, you changed in your mind the type of sacrifice that it is or the owner, it's fully disqualified. Unlike other sacrifices where machshavas shinui Hashem is not so consequential, the sacrifice itself remains kosher, with the Passover sacrifice it's different. Even this thought will disqualify it. So now what happens if somebody slaughters the Passover sacrifice on behalf of his entire group, and after some time he tells them, you should know, I didn't tell you at the time, but the Passover sacrifice that I slaughtered for you, I actually slaughtered with the wrong intent. I had the wrong sacrifice with the wrong people in mind. So what do you do now? Do they have to bring a second Pesach because the first one didn't work? Says the Rambam, if he was trustworthy to them, they actually believed him, they can rely on his words. If he isn't so trustworthy, maybe he's just pulling their leg or playing a prank, by law, by letter of the law, he's not believed. But if somebody would want to act stringently with himself, he would be praiseworthy and he should bring a second Pesach on the 14th of the month of Iyar. Halacha beis b'sar ha-Pesach shenitma v'noida loi koidem zrika. If the meat, the flesh of the Passover sacrifice becomes ritually impure while in the temple courtyard, and the person finds out before they sprinkle the blood. Now the word zrika is not so exact as we saw yesterday and the day before. With the Korban Pesach, it's more shvicha. You don't splash the blood on the altar, you pour the blood on the altar. But the point is that he found out before the blood was poured on the altar that the meat of his Passover sacrifice is ritually impure and cannot be eaten. Even if the fats and the meat that's going to be offered on the altar is actually pure, you shouldn't even bother with sprinkling the blood, because the whole reason you're offering a Passover sacrifice is to get to the goal of eating it. If you won't be able to eat it, the whole thing is worthless. Even if you sprinkle the blood in this scenario, you have not achieved atonement. But if you only found out about the circumstance of impurity after the blood was sprinkled or poured on the altar, then it is atoned. It is acceptable. Because we had this principle before already. The fact that the high priest wears the golden headplate, the tzitz, achieves atonement al shigigas habasar shenitma, on a case where flesh of a sacrifice became impure inadvertently. It can't take care of a case of purposely. That's why if you know about it before the blood was sprinkled, so you can't go take any further action. But after the blood was sprinkled, after the fact, you say that tzitz achieves atonement. If only part of the limbs of the sacrifice became impure, so burn what's impure and eat the rest that's pure. If it's the opposite, all the parts that are reserved for the altar, for Hashem, those meat and fats, those became impure. The rest of the meat that's going to be eaten by the people stayed pure. Go ahead, sprinkle the blood, pour the blood, and eat the meat that night at the Seder. If it's not the meat, but the owner of the sacrifice became impure after slaughtering the Passover sacrifice, don't bother with pouring the blood. If you do, it's not acceptable. Therefore, these people will be obligated to bring a second Passover sacrifice, because of course if you're impure, you cannot eat the Passover sacrifice at the right time. You'll bring it the next month. Because the tzitz cannot achieve atonement for impurity on the body of the person. It could achieve atonement for impurity on the flesh, on the meat of the sacrifice. But not if you have a problem. With one exception, if you became impure with tumah of the depths. That means nobody possibly knew about this source of impurity, and the whole source was only revealed later, as we explained in the last book, in the laws of improper entry to the Holy Temple, that if a person walked over an area and later on it was discovered that there was a corpse there, nobody knew about it before. So now, after the fact, the tzitz achieves atonement for that type of bodily impurity. But otherwise, there's no such thing as a person becoming impure and taking action about a sacrifice that would be atoned for by the tzitz. Halacha Gimel HaPesach Sheyotza Mirushalayim. What happens if the Passover sacrifice ends up leaving Jerusalem, which it's not supposed to? It's got to stay inside the walls. Or it became impure anytime on the 14th before Passover started. Yisaref miyad. What do you do with the meat? You burn it. You burn it in a place that was called the Beis Hadeshan, right outside the temple, and there was a special place for burning all disqualified sacrifices. Nitmu habaylim oimesu oimashchu es yedeyem. If there wasn't a problem in the sacrifice, again, a problem in the person, the owner became impure, the owner died, maybe the owner deregistered, they canceled their RSVP for the Passover group. Afilu nitmu emesu kaidem zrikas adam, even if they became impure or died before the sprinkling of the blood, you must leave the Passover sacrifice, not burn it right away. Leave it till 24 hours passes, and then you burn it. What's the difference? This is the guiding principle, this is the rule. If the disqualifying factor happened to the body of the actual Passover sacrifice, then it's burnt right away. If the problem happened to the blood or to the owners of the sacrifice, what you do is you wait for it to pass 24 hours and then you burn it. Therefore, if somebody slaughter the Passover sacrifice, knowing already that all the owners canceled their RSVP, or they had died, or they had become impure, which thereby they're pushed over to the second month anyways, and he still slaughters it, this is a scenario where you have to burn it right away. Why? Because here the disqualifying factor is in the body of the Passover sacrifice. Yes, the original problem was that the owners had a problem, but then you went ahead and slaughtered the Passover sacrifice knowing that was the circumstance. Now the sacrifice itself becomes inherently disqualified, and therefore you have to burn it right away. Says the Rambam, let's qualify one of the rules we said before. When do we say that the Passover sacrifice has to be burnt? If the owners became impure, owners means everybody in the group. But if only part of them became impure, the remaining pure people merit or take the rights of the portion belonging to the impure people. And of course, you don't burn it, you serve it to them. Those remaining pure people get to eat the Passover sacrifice. Says the Rambam, it goes even further. Even if the part of the group that became impure after they started eating, in other words, the Seder already started, they had the lamb in front of them, they began to consume the meat, and they became impure, something touched them or whatever it was, and the people that are still pure around the table, so long as they didn't begin to eat yet, they assume the rights of the leftover meat on the plates of the impure people. But if everybody already began to eat, and then part of the people became impure, the pure people do not assume the rights of the impure people's food. If the pure people eat their portion, the portion of the impure people gets burnt. Same thing if part of them died. The last few rules would apply equally to impurity and to death. Says the Rambam, there's a difference exactly where you would burn the sacrifice in different cases of impurity. If the entire body of the sacrifice became impure, or at least most of it, we burn it in front of the Holy Temple, in front of everybody. To embarrass them. They should be careful. You shouldn't have allowed it to become impure. At the same time, we supply the wood. We give them wood from the wood pile in the Mizbeach to use it to burn, so nobody should be suspicious and think that they stole from the wood pile of the Mizbeach, we outright give it to them. Therefore, if they choose to burn it with straw and with reeds, they wanted to spend their own belongings to burn it, surfing, they can do so, because there's no possibility that they would have stolen from the Mizbeach's wood pile, because the Mizbeach only had proper logs. If only a minute quantity of the animal became impure, or any leftover meat from the Passover sacrifice after the night of the Seder, to begin with, you burn it in your courtyard using your own wood. Actually not from the wood pile of the Mizbeach. We don't want to have anything holy in your possession left, which would cause you to do me'ilah, the last set of laws that we had, sacrilege, misusing consecrated items. Halacha dalet. Hamafrish nekeva lepischoi oizachar ben shtei shanim. A person puts aside an animal that isn't fit for the Passover sacrifice. Let's say it's a female. Let's say it's in its second year of life. It has to be in its first year of life. Yireh ad sheyipel beimum. Still, there's some holiness that devolves upon it, and therefore you have to let it graze till it develops a proper blemish. V'yimacher v'yavi b'dam of Pesach. Then you can sell it and bring with the proceeds a new Passover sacrifice. But if Passover already passed, before it had a chance to get a blemish, there was no blemish, and you already offered your own Passover sacrifice, yavi b'dam of shlamim, then as we've seen in the past before, Passover sacrifice has equal sanctity as peace offerings. So once you can no longer bring a Passover sacrifice, simply convert it into a peace offering. Halacha hey hifrish pischay v'meis. If you put aside a Passover sacrifice and then the person dies, of course, he no longer needs to bring his sacrifice. So what do you do with the animal? Lo yivianu b'nei acharav l'shem ha'pesach ela l'shem shlamim. When the heir, the son, brings it, he should not bring it having in mind for Passover sacrifice. He should bring it as a regular peace offering. Except if he was part of the group, if he was RSVP'd with his dad, then he can offer it, of course, as the Passover sacrifice because it's part of his group as well. When is this law applicable? If his father died after midday on the 14th, the obligation to bring a Passover sacrifice already began, and then the dad died. But if he died before midday, the son is a mourner now. He's anyways pushed off to the second Passover in Iyar 1 month later because he's a deep mourner, as will be explained in 2 days from now in chapter 6. And therefore the son will have to bring the Passover sacrifice anyways on the second month by Pesach Sheni. Halacha vav, Misha avad pischai. A person lost his Passover sacrifice. He put aside a sacrifice, lost it, umitzai achar shehifrish pesach acher. But he only found it after already putting aside another animal for the Passover sacrifice. Now you have 2 animals standing, what do you do? Says the Rambam, you choose. Whichever one you want, you offer as a Passover sacrifice. The other, you offer as a peace offering. If you found the original animal after already slaughtering the second animal as a Passover sacrifice, then of course, it's brought as a peace offering. Same thing if you would do tmura. Tmura means exchange. It's forbidden to exchange one animal with another. If you do, there's a penalty. Both become holy. Says the Rambam, let's say this scenario. You put aside a Passover sacrifice, you lost it. You took another one, you already slaughtered it, then you find the first one, still somewhat holy, and you do tmura with it. You try to exchange it to another animal. It and the exchange both need to be offered as a peace offering. But if you were to find it before slaughtering the second one, since at this point you get to choose whichever one you want, as we just said in the beginning of the halacha, which means that every animal of the 2 could potentially be brought as a Passover or as a peace offering. If you were to do then tmura, exchange with the animal that you just found, whether before or after slaughtering the second one that you put aside instead of it, the second one, the exchange cannot be offered, you let it graze till it gets a blemish, and you bring a peace offering with the proceeds. Halacha Zayin, Pesach she'avra shnasai. Passover sacrifice was separated, all good, it was in its first year of life. Then it passes its birthday. Ushlamim habayim machmas ha-Pesach. And any of the peace offerings that have to come as a result of a Passover sacrifice, the ones we just explained in the last halacha. You found one, you lost one. The point is, there's a peace offering that's being offered as an extension of being a Passover sacrifice. They convert their status. They're completely like a peace offering. To unin smicha, they have to have leaning on them. Unisachim, they have to have libations. Utnufas chazav v'shayik, you have to wave the breast and the thigh that you give to the Kohen. Masha'inkin b'Pesach, which all these laws don't apply to a Passover sacrifice. But once it converts to peace offering, it assumes all the laws of a peace offering. Halacha ches, Pesach shenis arev b'shlamim, if you have one animal for a Passover sacrifice, another animal or animals for peace offerings, and they get mixed up, yikrevu kulam shlamim, you offer them all as peace offerings. Nis arev b'zvachim acherim, if the Passover sacrifice mixes with other types of sacrifices, burnt offerings, guilt offerings, sin offerings, you name it, yiru ad sheyipel bahem mum, you have them all graze till they develop a blemish, v'yavi b'dmei hayafa shebahem mimin zeh, and you take the highest worth, choicest animal, and that's the worth that establishes for both types of sacrifices. You must bring one species of sacrifice with the price of that highest amount, using the same amount of money as the benchmark, bring a peace offering, paying the difference, losing the difference from your house, as we explained in the laws of disqualified sacrifices, because of the mixture, you lose the difference. If a Passover offering got mixed with a firstborn offering, have them all graze till they get a blemish, and they'll all be eaten with the sanctity of a firstborn that gets a mum, as we're going to explain later in this book, in the section of laws dealing with firstborns. Then you take one animal, as choice, as the choicest in that mixture, and you'll say, wherever the Passover sacrifice is, transfer its holiness to this animal, and offer it either as a Passover sacrifice if it hasn't passed yet, but if it's passed, you bring it as a peace offering, and thereby you divorce that holiness of the Passover offering from this group, and everything can be eaten once the blemishes come. A person puts aside a Passover offering before he converts. He's a guy, but he's learning and he's training to become Jewish. You tell him Pesach is coming, put aside a Passover sacrifice. He puts one aside, but then he converts. Or a slave puts aside a Passover offering before he's free, then he's emancipated. Or a child puts aside a Passover offering before he grows 2 pubic hairs, which is the sign of maturity according to the Torah, and then he produces those hairs later. In all these scenarios, they can offer this offering for a Passover offering. As we explained, a live animal never is rejected. So even though it was put aside in a state when the person couldn't have brought it, now that the person can, this live animal reassumes a sanctified status and it can be offered. A person puts aside money which he plans to bring a Korban Pesach, and there's extra money left. Yavi hamayser shlamim, he must use the extra money to bring a peace offering. If a person registers other people onto his Passover sacrifice or to his chagiga, which we'll talk about later in this set of laws, there was a second celebratory offering everyone used to bring together with the Korban Pesach, and he puts other people in the group. Whatever money he takes from them as payment is considered mundane, it's not holy. Even though if you think about it, the one guy who got the sheep was the one that put aside the animal. The other guys put aside money to pay for it. And he took the money and thereby registered them on the Korban Pesach. Doesn't matter. The money remains mundane. This is a condition that's been with the Jewish people for a long time. Jews always have said to themselves, when we separate the actual animal becomes holy. When we put aside money, the money is mundane. It's just our way of paying into the group, but the money itself never becomes holy. Halacha Yud Aleph, Eitzim, Shel Tzlias HaPesach KaPesach, wood used in the roasting process of the Passover offering is like the Passover offering. It's as holy. V'chein matzah u'marer, also the matzah and the bitter herbs that come along with the Passover offering. Hoyil v'heim machshirei HaPesach, since they are direct accessories to the Korban Pesach, harehem KaPesach, they have the holy status of the Passover offering. V'im lokach mimoyes HaPesach, mimi shemona oisam imay. If you took extra money though, from somebody who's in the group, they should also have some matzah and bitter herbs, or to have a portion in the wood that you're using to roast. The same conditions apply. Any money that's invested in this procedure is all mundane. It's not considered holy, because as Rambam said before, that's the condition which the Jews stipulated when offering their Passover offerings.